Good afternoon, everyone. We are just starting the webinar and we're going to hold for probably a minute or so till everybody joins. We're just going to let everybody join in. Again, thanks everybody for joining. We're just giving it a minute for letting everybody come on board here. And the webinar today is Complexities of Green Fleet Strategy for Mid-sized Municipalities. I'm going to do some housekeeping while everybody's getting on board. We will use the Q&A, not the chat feature today. It is being recorded and will be available in about a week's time when they upload it to the website. The Q&A will be saved for the end of the presentation because it's really hard for us to see all the questions. So the presentation is going to be about a half an hour. And then at the end, Paul will look at all the Q&As and answer. And if we don't get to all of your questions, we will respond. And alternatively, you can reach out to our Sharma at municipalengineers.on.ca, and we'll repeat that at the end of the webinar as well. We might as well get going. There's still people joining, but today I would like to introduce everybody to Paul. On behalf of the Climate Change Committee, we will be presenting the topic of transitioning a mid-sized municipal fleet from gas to electric. In 2023, the City of Burlington revamped the Green Fleet Strategy. This presentation will include a discussion with real costing, effects on infrastructure, facility planning, and emission examples which can be used for sistering municipalities. Paul is employed at the City of Burlington and has held roles in both fleet and facilities. His past experience includes consulting, building science, and asset management. And now I'm going to hand it off to you, Paul.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Soyoklo, and I'm the manager of corporate fleet at the City of Burlington. Today, I am pleased to present the complexities of a green fleet strategy for mid-sized municipalities. So today, I will be starting with the background of the plan and the reasons for implementation. Then we will get into the fleet transition plan, showing the phased replacement, about the different types of vehicle replacement and how we want to go about completing the strategy. We will then review our emissions and see how we intend to meet our targets of the 2040 vision we currently have at Burlington. We will then look at the effects of the transition costs on our budget and our reserve funds. And lastly, we will discuss the effects of infrastructure and other implementation challenges that we are facing with implementing a green fleet strategy. So Burlington's Green Fleet Strategy was originally created 15 years ago in about 2008. And between 2008 and the current strategy, it was renewed in the interim. The first part of the strategy was to complete a comprehensive analysis of the existing fleet, the equipment and tools, their usages, life cycles, replacement value, as well as the actual infrastructure and where these are parked and what departments are being serviced by corporate fleet, transit, and fire. The second part was to benchmark green fleet strategies against industry best practices, and that includes working with municipal partners coast to coast. We were looking at municipalities that offer the same services as ourselves, as well as the same size. The third part was putting all this information together to develop a transition roadmap for the fleet and budget to align with the city's goal of achieving carbon net neutrality by 2040. Lastly, we reviewed our existing infrastructure and seeing what we had to do to accommodate this green fleet. There's one thing to just simply buy vehicles and buses and fire equipment. A whole nother idea is now you are transitioning to an entirely new fuel source. And how are these items going to be serviced? Where will they be stored? What are the requirements around all of that? As well as, most importantly, how to charge and replenish the fuel in these assets. So at the City of Burlington, we have a relatively smaller fleet than maybe some of you here on the call, with about 351 licensed vehicles. This does not include pieces of equipment, tractors, handheld equipment. With that, we're about at the 1,000 to 2,000 mark. But for today's kind of purposes, we are looking at our licensed vehicles here. And then you'll see in phase two and in phase three, we get into replacing some more non-licensed off-road vehicles. So each of the city's fleet we have three operating groups, that being corporate fleet. So your typical fleet vehicles for roads, parks, and forestry, for bylaw engineering services. Then we have fire, and then we have transit as well. So this is a mix of vehicles from cars, minivans, fire emergency, medium duty, tractors, loaders, street sweepers, you name it. If we do it at the city, we are trying to electrify it. The majority of the vehicles at the city's fleet are propelled by fossil fuels. This was back in 2023. So we had at the time about 11% of our fleet was electric or plug-in hybrid, and that consisted of a trial project we were doing for small equipment for light-duty vehicles, which was your typical kind of Honda Ioniq level, as well as we were starting to transition over some of our recreation vehicles, being Zambonis and some implements with ice making. As of in 2023, 89% of the city's fleet relied on different fuels such as fossil fuels such as gasoline, diesel, different types of dyed diesel. We didn't have any biodiesel here at Burlington, but we also had natural gas as well. So overall, we had about $30 million for corporate, 25 for fire, and about 50 million, give or take, for transit. So the way that we wanted to go about our plan was to be very realistic in its replacement and to replace assets that were coming up for replacement. So every year when we do condition evaluations of our fleet, we look at life cycle costs, we look at maintenance costs, and how much these assets are being used at the city and whether or not they're needed for replacement. So back in 2023, we looked at doing three different phases. The first phase being the light duty pickup trucks, transit buses, and small equipment and tools. The reason why we stuck with this group was because of the technology available at the time. So something that we certainly learned over the past couple of years is that the EV market is one of the, I wouldn't call it emerging, but one of the fastest growing markets in technology. My background comes from not only fleet, but in facilities, and I know there's not a lot of innovations when it comes down to putting down an asphalt roof or something like that. I've never been in an industry that almost every 3 to 6 months somebody is creating something, or is there some sort of breakthrough with technology or motors. So that was the you could say the thinking behind our plan was we wanted to make sure that when we were replacing these things, not only did not only are they able to be used in a commercial sense, but also the fact that they were not as expensive as their gas equivalent parts. So in phase one, this is from 2024 to 2028. As I stated, we were looking for the replacement of light duty and passenger vehicles. And we found that there was just a wide variety of models, as well as competitors in a tender situation that we were able to transition into. In phase two is from 2029 to 2033. And at that time, we wanted to transition more of you could call it the class two, so your F-250s and above. We're starting to get fully electric buses, heavier duty vehicles, and beginning with fire trucks and some of our heavier tractors and loaders. And lastly, in phase three, we would be focusing on fire trucks, heavy duty vehicles such as our plows, your tractors and loaders. So you're thinking about your backhoes as well as your Class 8 vehicles, as well as again for transit buses. So overall, we would be looking at transitioning approximately, and every year it expands a little bit more, but 350 to about 400 licensed vehicles, with the exception, as I said, with the equipment tools and non-licensed vehicles. So this is how it looks like in graph form. And what we find is that we are doing the majority of our replacements in phase one and in phase two. The reason behind that is that this is kind of, you call it the low-hanging fruit. So we have the light-duty vehicles that have been proven that EV is effective. You have certain handheld tools that have been proven effective in some instances. And what I mean by that is some technology such as blowers or some bush cutters may not be there, but your lighter duty blowers, your very light chainsaws, and some pieces of equipment can be replaced, and that again is based off of volume. As you get into phase two and in phase three, although we are not replacing a lot of the vehicles, what is happening is they're becoming much more expensive. So your typical F-150 is about $60,000, 65,000 off the lot. You're replacing 10 of those vehicles as opposed to replacing one plow, which is anywhere between, with options, at a minimum 550 to upwards of $750,000 per plow fully outfitted. So when we get into the CO2 emission reduction, it's a bit of an interesting story because it's not quite as linear as we expected. Depending on the types of vehicles we are replacing, as well as depending on the fuel source, you're going to get more bang for your buck, so to speak, when you are replacing, say, two-stroke motors with small equipment. When you're mixing oil and gas and burning that, that's probably the worst emission that you can kind of create from an internal combustion engine. You have diesels. Now, diesels are currently at tier four, but if you're replacing an older diesel that might be a tier two or a tier three, you're going to get a lot better removal of emissions when you're going to EVs, as well as depending on where we were with the plan. So you can see it's very unique. In 2036, our emissions are almost zero to none. And at that time, we envision having a lot of hybrid replacements or alternative fuel replacements that may be reducing our emissions, but not entirely. So over this plan, because we only have life cycle costs of some of our light duty vehicles at 10 years or our small equipment at 3 years, we may be transitioning to hybrid in the interim, as we have done with some of our light duty vehicles now, based off availability. And then we're able to transition into fully zero emission vehicles as some of that technology is realized and as well as it becomes less expensive. And some of those bumps in the graph that you see here before you are simply when we're doing large orders. So as I stated, when we are replacing these vehicles, we often buy 5 or 6 plows at a time in order to realize cost efficiencies with tenders. And as such, you're going to be reducing emissions in kind of bumps as you go down as these large polluters come offline and we get green alternatives. So getting down to brass tacks, this is what it looked like in 2023, with obviously some inflation adjustments. We all know tariffs are now at play. The automotive industry, there's cars are certainly not getting cheaper on your dealership lots. On what it looked like. And basically, if we forecast it to now or even into the future, we're basically putting anywhere between 10 to maybe even 20%, depending on tariffs, on what this actually looks like, as well as where it's being manufactured. So even small items such as, we are buying, if you bought like a Ford Maverick, we know that that is being produced in Mexico, so it may not be faced the same tariffs as they are in the States, but we may be getting different tariffs from parts and different components that are being shipped around worldwide, which further adds to the complexity and costs of kind of your modern day vehicle. So what we're looking at is essentially we have two bars here. We have the business as usual and we have the green fleet plan. And the business as usual is if we were going to continue replacing internal combustion with internal combustion. And green fleet is when we are replacing internal combustion with green vehicles, which would either be a hybrid or a fully battery operated vehicle. So costing in both phase one and phase two is we're looking at about a 15% jump from business as usual to green. And this incorporates our light duty fleet. And typically, what we're finding now is that your sedans and even your trucks now are about 15 to 20% of an increase, depending on your options. Back when this study was created, your F-150 was about 95,000, believe it or not, for a fully electric truck, while we were purchasing trucks at about 60 to 65,000. Those costs have been reduced quite significantly to where a Lightning, for instance, just for our example purposes, is anywhere between the 75 and 80, 85 mark, depending with options. So now what we're seeing is the EVs are being produced. They're being produced with more volume. There's more factories, et cetera. There's a higher adoption. There's more consumer demand for certain vehicles, and we're actually now able to consider without taking a bigger dent in our reserve funds or in our budget to say, you know what, this is actually a really great idea where we can start to realize better life cycle costs than with an ICE vehicle. So overall, at phase one, this is our light duties. It's about $80 million for business as usual versus about 95 for green, so about a 15% increase. Business as usual in phase two is about 100 million versus about 125 at about an 18% increase, give or take. And then, sorry, we have phase three, which is about 182 million versus 220. And again, we're at between the 15 to 20% mark. So over this entire plan, we forecasted that was about a cost difference of about 20%. Now, the 20% cost difference isn't just the actual vehicle costs themselves. It incorporates a whole host of other factors, some factors that today in 2025 don't actually even exist anymore. And we built this into our plan. So as you can see here on the left is the business as usual scenario, and on the right is the green fleet scenario. So the business as usual scenario, excuse me, the business as usual scenario for the capital cost is looking at about 206 million versus the capital cost for green fleet. And what that also incorporates is not only are EVs more expensive, but our infrastructure is going to cost. We're going to be upgrading switch gears. We're going to be upgrading substations. We're going to be upgrading transformers, lines going to these properties, especially when you're looking at transit buildings or looking at RPF yards. This is megawatts potentially of what you may have to retrofit to your electricity services. What we find is compared to a business as usual versus green fleet is green fleet actually has lower maintenance. As you can imagine, with green fleet, you don't have a transmission. You don't have a lot of fluids. You don't have transition oil. You don't have certain coolants. The electric car is much simpler than or you could say it's simpler in its amount of components, complexity of components, but its complexity remains the same because now you're introducing much more different pieces of boards, software, and everything that kind of goes along with that. But what we found was maintenance is actually reduced. With that, obviously, fleet is or fuel is also being reduced. The reason why we still have $32 million worth of fuel is the fact that we're not transitioning everything overnight to electric. We still have about 20 years of gas, and being a lot of the heavy producers or heavy users of gas, our plows, things like that, our tractors, they consume the most expensive as well as the most amount of fuel. So we still are incurring fuel costs till the end of the strategy. Obviously, we have the cost of electricity and some utility costs, and as a municipality, we have preferred rates. In our case, we're very unique because we do have Burlington Hydro here at the City of Burlington. And then we have infrastructure and staffing operations costs. So now you're going to have to manage, if you think effectively, an entire fuel source. So in some of our municipalities, you may have fuel sites on your actual yards. You may have gas cards, but here now you're effectively you don't have a central site or a central 5 sites or so that have gas tanks. You're looking at sites all over the city. You are essentially becoming a energy producing commission, if you want to think of it that way. So the complexity of that, managing that infrastructure, is a whole other complexity that needs to be added on as we move towards fully green. And then lastly, we have the infamous, you could say, carbon tax. So it was a double-edged sword when it came down to municipalities. And what I mean by that is that not only did municipalities get the benefit of the tax, but we ourselves were also taxed on the fact that we had carbon-producing vehicles. So with that now being eliminated, what we found was it had an impact, but it didn't. And the reason I say that is that the market adjusted itself where you were originally, if you were buying an F-150 a Lightning at 95,000 and you were getting a $5,000 credit, that means that in your pocket, you'd be removing 90,000. But as the EVs got more inexpensive, the F-150s got cheaper, more cheaper than the original subsidies. So in the end, we haven't done the calculations, but it's not too far from being a wash where, the cost efficiencies as technology gets better, as costs become cheaper, that we didn't really see that much of an effect, at least on our small size of a municipality with the carbon tax. So what we calculated is that if we were going to proceed down this route without federal funding, it would be about a 20% increase in implementing the fleet with infrastructure, as well as, or sorry, not as well as, but if we did not receive those subsidies, then we were going to be, or if we did receive those subsidies, sorry, it would be at about 17%. So 20% if we did not do external funding, and about 17% with external funding. But right now, as kind of those programs are drying up, we're finding that it's somewhere in between, and it might potentially, it is less than we anticipated. So with the operating costs, what we found was that business as usual costs, we modeled it in a linear fashion where we're still adding plows, we're still adding and contributing to municipal services. We're certainly not coming back and sweeping the streets less or sweeping less bike lanes or all of the infrastructure that you good folks put in, but we have to maintain it more. The levels of service are always increasing. People are demanding things simply are kept at in a higher fashion. And so with that, we always have to provide more services and this is even as new ice arenas come online, swimming pools come online. There's infrastructure that needs to support that, not only from the operations side, but you're thinking Zambonis and other pieces of equipment. What we're finding and what we found, sorry, an interesting question came up during our council. And what it was when will you achieve? Hello? Can you guys hear me now?
Do you need me, Paul?
No, sorry, something happened with Zoom. I had my audio cut out.
You're okay now, Paul. Sorry to the participants, but I could hear you now.
Okay, my apologies. I will resume the screen share. Okay, no, I've already got my screen share. Apologies. So one of the main questions from council is when were we going to achieve net neutrality with cost? So when was green essentially going to be less expensive than ice? And what we found was, based off of our financials, we were looking about 2050. And that is because we would have to take offline a lot of the fueling systems. We would finally realize the costs with training on what we would get, the full benefit from green as opposed to ice. So that was still kind of contingent on the technologies and the assumptions we made at the time. This is assuming that fuel still stays very expensive, and every 10 to 20 years, it further compounds, which is kind of what we've used for historical. But that's what we were kind of banking on, is to say, okay, if we continue the same trajectory of the past 20 years of insurance and fuels and things like that, we would think about 2050 is when we would finally have cost efficiencies. So infrastructure and facility planning, and this is something that I don't think a lot of there's not good foresight with green fleet plans because of the costs which you are retrofitting facilities. So you are looking into, as I said, switch gears, you're looking at transformers, you're looking at expanding services. It's almost as if you're creating a commission onto itself in order to keep this fleet going. Now, at the city, we provide electrical chargers for the staff and the public as well. So you also have this benefit where not only are you greening our fleet, but you're also providing the facilities essentially to encourage electrical and EV purchase. So what we found is we found out where all of our departments are located, what real estate we owned, and we forecasted and assumed where we would want to put all of our chargers and what we had to retrofit. Now, the issue with that, obviously, is that departments move around. Municipalities constantly buy and sell property. So it isn't for actual certain, especially if you kind of think within your own municipalities, where were you 5 years ago? What plans were you working on 10 years ago? And where you currently are? You may not even be located in the same city hall or in the same building as you were before COVID. So this adds a huge complexity for some of the investments that would be very expensive for upgrading these facilities, as well as once you do the upgrades, now you are tied to certain locations because it's not as simple as putting in a fueling station and coming back to the yard and fueling up. If you're putting in level 3 chargers, this is a very expensive infrastructure located all around your municipality in order to effectively serve your constituents while still being anchored to some locations where you're being deployed, such as bylaw or engineering services or RPF. So last but not least, I just wanted to go through some of the challenges and miscellaneous items we found as we start to implement this green fleet. So not only the cost of vehicles are increasing, but some of the fueling limitations that we had. When you think about when we want to put in chargers, we want things like level 3 where you connect it and within 15, 20 minutes it's fully charged. That infrastructure is very expensive, and what we are currently doing now is something where somebody may arrive to work, they may go to site visits, they may complete their work, but then the vehicles are being charged on site for multiple hours or being charged left overnight. And what we always find here at Burlington is that we want basically one vehicle per charger so that we have the ability that nobody is ever out of fuel at any given time. Now, this obviously from 2023 to now, you can buy a Toyota Prius that has a tank of 800 kilometers. It's not as, and with the municipality that I believe are only 20 kilometers wide by we are north, um, you know, you only have to charge this vehicle once every 2 weeks or once every week, depending on your duties. So that's some of it's almost as if the industry is solving a lot of the problems itself because a lot of the technology is either emerging or in the newer stage. We're also finding interesting conflicts and challenges when it comes to storage facility and insurance. So a lot of the insurance companies actually don't know how to deal with storing 80 buses inside. Well, you could say, well, you still have gas tanks full of fuel and we have dangers, but we also have about, 100 years of insurance and 100 years of dealing with these risks. The risks that are associated with EVs and batteries is really no more dangerous than a gas vehicle. But now you're looking at how do you look at fire suppression? How do you look at warning systems? Are you putting in infrared cameras in buildings and looking at the heat of all of these batteries to see if something is unhealthy? Are you creating a telematics program where you're tracking the battery health of some of these buses? So I focus on buses because I know that there has been incidents in neighboring municipalities where there may have been a fire, or you hear or you see on YouTube, a fire on a roadway. When you get into some of these larger vehicles with these massive batteries, that does become a significant risk. That's something that even the building code right now, and educate me in the chat if I'm incorrect, but some of that suppression system may not be already written in. So we're really pioneering in some of the stuff that of how we store these things. Availability. So about 2, 3 years ago, we couldn't buy vehicles worth anything during COVID, especially EVs with the chip shortage. And as chips are being redistributed, as we know, for AI, and you ever try to get a computer graphics card, the costs of those things have launched substantially. And it's no different with the EVs. The EVs, the costs are really primarily with its electronics, sourcing different manufacturers and putting that all together. So we found an issue with availability in that respect, as well as availability with parts. So if you're looking at investing kind of on the forefront and piloting some different manufacturers, they may not be around in 5 years. We found that in the medium to heavy duty sector, a lot of kind of internationally, you had the startups, you had prototypes, some people were purchasing them, and some of these vehicles are made of a sum of all parts, where you were taking parts from Hyundai, you were taking parts from Ford, you were taking parts from BYD, and some of these companies may not be around anymore, or the support might not be there. So being a municipality where sometimes you're buying, the plow trucks that are lasting anywhere between 10 and 15 years, you need that 15, 20 years at least of support, and knowing that you can go to a dealership and you can order it, and you're not salvaging certain pieces of equipment. Technology performance is not quite where we want it for medium and heavy duty vehicles. So, when we are looking at purchasing something like a Lightning, it's a 15% increase in cost for an equivalent unit, if not better. And, you know, at this time, the city is not willing to, purchase. Caterpillar came out with a brand new electric backhoe last year. Your backhoe of about a 210, you're looking at about $250,000. This backhoe is between 500 and 600,000 Canadian. So we don't want to jump into that sector quite yet, because we don't have quite the proven technology when diesel is currently available. And essentially, when you're looking at some of these higher risk vehicles like loaders for snow control, plows for winter maintenance, backhoes for stormwater and all the construction activities we do, it turns very risky, as opposed to if a light vehicle goes down, we can rent, we have so many available options. So right now, that's the way we phase it. This is why we pushed it to the phase 2 and the phase 3. Number 4, battery and software maintenance. So, I give you 500 pieces of small equipment. So that means you need 500 batteries. Well, no, you should probably have about 3 to 2 batteries per piece of equipment. So now you're dealing with 1,500 batteries. Where do you store these batteries? How do you charge them? How do you watch their health? How do you make sure that they don't kind of turn into what they call those pillows and they start expanding and eventually catch on fire? If you can imagine, even your own IT departments, how do you manage 3,000, 2,000 laptops and their batteries? So this turns into now kind of a whole life cycle of purchasing and tendering, monitoring, and then as well as disposal. How do you get rid of these things? Can I simply, go to a yard and throw out 2,000 batteries, or is there a proper recycling? So we haven't even gotten into and scratched that surface. But I'm sure there's businesses and things like that out there. But you may be looking at different disposal, as well as upkeep and maintenance with such a new fuel source. We're also finding some limitations in upfitting. So something is very interesting is, although we've got the kind of the same clamshell and the same e-transits, or we don't have electric ProMasters yet, but tying into certain electrical systems, storing things that may conflict what's in a battery. If you have sensitive electrical equipment, is it shielded and things like that? So the outfitters are, I mean, new things are coming out every day, but it's not as, we've been outfitting cars and trucks for 30 years and we're doing it this way. Now you're playing with a whole different technology, but with that also comes new advantages, because like you've seen on the F-150 Lightnings, you can connect power sources to the back. The truck can, I think I've seen in advertisements, they could power your house or something like that in emergency. So we're starting to realize that, my goodness, we have a huge battery that maybe there is some more benefits to what services we can provide and what technology is available because we have a whole brand new look at what we for vehicles. And last but not least, but right to repair. So we all know we've got our iPhones, our Teslas and things like that. And we want to be able, as a municipality, to make sure that we can repair what we're buying. We have the technical literature that's available, as well as the equipment and material and the tools. As new technology comes online, new oils, new things like that, they're always kind of patented for a couple of years. Sometimes they're not constrained by the same patents worldwide, but we're not actually able to purchase it from different manufacturers than those that originally created it. So, John Deere is notorious for their softwares as well, and we want to make sure that at any time, not only can we repair these items that we're procuring, and it's also cheaper to repair, but that we will also have a legacy of parts. And this is something that we've been looking into as we replace vehicles. We're looking at larger manufacturers such as Ford and GM and Stellantis, as opposed to gravitating towards smaller, new, and upcoming piling, you could say, or startups, because we are uncertain on what parts they're using and the longevity of some of those brands. So I'd like to thank you for listening to my presentation. And at this time, you could post any questions in the question and answer. And we have approximately, I think, about 25 minutes or so on the call left. So it looks like we still have 61 participants. Do we have, Kelly, can you see if any answers are coming in? Or sorry, questions. Oh, the chat is blocked.
Paul, Dan here. Just a message to the participants. You could ask your questions under the Q&A tab. You
Yeah.
can, and we'll get your question that way.
Yeah, use the Q&A, please. Yeah, sorry if anybody missed that at the beginning. The chat is not active, so if you can use the Q&A, that would be great. Please and thank you. And alternatively, if you have questions that aren't able to be, or if you wanted to email them to our Shab at municipal. Oh my goodness, I just had his email here. I do apologize. R Sharma at municipalengineers.on.ca. Then that would be great. Looks like there might be some more coming through here. Yep. Can you see that, Paul?
Yes. So I believe I've got the first question there as under your operational costs, it noted 90,000. It seems to be extremely low. So that was the operational cost. So because we get a preferred rate, we had to blend the fuel costs and the utility cost. So the fuel cost is built into um, the electricity as well as the diesel and with the fuel. And the utility costs are as kind of our miscellaneous costs of if you're not charging, what else would you be using for utilities? So things such as in vehicle maintenance, in certain facilities to kind of keep the lights on with some of these chargers. So that is a kind of inconsequential cost compared to the actual electricity usage. Um, that we would be getting from our fleet. So yeah, it is very, very low, but we kind of wanted to separate to see like what would the infrastructure be charging us. And in long story short, it would just simply to be to keep the lights on. William's got a question is can you repeat the upsizing versus the right sizing of the fleet? So upsizing is basically when you are looking at changing the scope of work of what you are of the task you're performing. So if you are, say, a stormwater crew and you currently drive around in an F-150 and you've had a council mandate that now you need to take a generator with you, break up asphalt or concrete, you will be upsizing to a F-250 or an F-350 in order to accommodate the new payload that you're driving around. So that is different than right sizing, because when you're looking at right sizing, uh, you are evaluating what the actual operator or what the team is doing and right sizing. So right sizing could mean actually downgrading the size of the vehicle or changing the equipment on what you need. For instance, at the City of Burlington, we have animal control. Some of you know that we have a coyote problem like many other municipalities. So if we're right sizing a fleet, we might be replacing an F-150 with maybe like a cargo van that you could have different tools and equipment that needs to be kept out of the weather. So that's the difference between uh, upsizing and right sizing. Do you foresee any operational performance issues for EVs equipment class 6 and 8 in Canadian weather? We do. When you are purchasing any electronic, they have that kind of IPV, uh, um, you know, for rain. But what we find with Canadian weather is not only do we have the extremely cold temperatures, so you're looking at, anywhere, I mean, at least in Ontario or Southern Ontario, you can get up to -20, -25. And, you know, manufacturers are still recommending in the medium and obviously above the heavy duty class to keep batteries outside or to keep batteries inside and not keep them inside. Or sorry, to keep batteries inside and not keep them outside. So much so that we have battery warming. So there are devices and stuff like that where you're using the battery's charge to warm the battery so that you can then start it, because a cold battery, you simply can't, you won't get power from it. So we do see a lot of operational performance issues, and that's why we feel that for phase 2 and phase 3, why we push those medium and heavy duty vehicles, because we want to see what new technologies come up with. We don't really have that issue currently right now. With some of our light duties, and maybe some people on the call may have an EV and they may face some difficulties. But it all depends on kind of how actually cold it is when you're starting these things up. Evidently, what we found is that the EVs tend to use more energy in the summer than they do in the winter, because you have the AC running. When a vehicle gets very warm, you tend to kind of turn the heat down a little bit, and it doesn't exactly tax the battery as much. Whereas in the summertime, you're always running that AC, and it is actually a heavier load, we found, at least with our light duty vehicles. Natalie do you do any right sizing activities through this plan? If so, what does that look like? So as I stated before, with kind of the upsizing and the upsizing, when we replace vehicles, we look at them as a class by class basis and right size a vehicle with the group. So if you have a vehicle such as you are driving, we have vehicles that are 24/7 patrol. So we put 150 to 200,000 kilometers, like I said, within a 20, 50 kilometer radius, because they are driving up and down the streets, collecting glass, roadkill, you name it, responding. And in that case, we wouldn't want an EV. We want to make sure that it is gasoline. So we have to make sure that when we are transitioning fuel sources, that it is also suitable for the group and for their use. And I think that's just generally best practice with any fleet at your municipality. Sangrita says, when you look at the CO2 emissions dropping in 2036, does this also include the emissions associated with the disposal of EVs and fuels? So it does not. So as everybody knows, batteries are very toxic to mine. They're very toxic to produce, and they're very toxic to dispose of. But as that technology gets better, just as, 80 years ago when you simply had to take your motor oil and dump it down your drain, you have different recycling programs. So we're hoping to obviously mitigate that in the future. But I think that those, I mean, Sangrita, you make a great point about the CO2 emissions. We're never going to get away from the kind of cradle to cradle, as they say, life cycle. It will always be there. It will never be truly net zero. But that is something that I think just with new technology, we look towards a future with better recycling methods. Would you be able to expand a little bit more? Seem too low to subsidize or charging. So, if you
I
could send
think
me that
you, I
question.
think you already, I think you already answered those three. This was a follow-up from earlier. I
Oh,
think you've already addressed it. I think you got to go to Nicholas's question.
I'm in a small town and trying to update our greenhouse gas inventory and found it difficult to get granular fuel consumption data for different types of vehicles and equipment. How does Burlington keep track of fuel consumption and how is this integrated into different departments, divisions, staff practices? Does your staff keep fuels electronically or do you restrict fueling to specific locations and vehicle types and divisions? Great question. So at the City of Burlington, we have centralized fuel stations. We do not have gas cards. And essentially, if you want to fuel up your vehicle, you must do it at our facilities. We have a facility at our RPF yard, we have a transit facility, and we have fire. In order for you to fuel up, you have to use your employee ID and you have to put it into the wind fuel system as we currently have. You have to put your mileage in and then you're able to dispense the fuel. That fuel is being tracked in WindFuel, and now we have a certain data set. With that data set, we can use Power BI and certain API to basically model this and show kind of how much fuel is being used within each department. But one of the main facts of it is that we do have the centralized locations. If you have things like fuel cards or if you have many different stations that don't have that technology, it is extremely difficult to get that data. And with the actual wind fuel system, we're able to restrict different types of fuel. So if you're putting in your employee ID and you're not authorized to dispense diesel or clear diesel or gasoline, say if you're just simply a CVR or a plow driver, you can't physically put the wrong gasoline in that vehicle. Oh, sorry, as well as we have to actually put the vehicle ID in. So there's three kind of sets of data before it gets dispersed. So a main key with that is having the infrastructure already set up. And Dan Henry asks, what are some comments you've seen from the front line in usage? Did you have to run different communication programs? So it all depends on the actual department itself. We are looking to roll this out because fleet in Burlington is under RPF. We were able to really have like a lot of intimate conversations where in order to warm people up, we have demo days. So we have manufacturers come out, bring a fleet of vehicles, bring a fleet of equipment, and you have coffee and donuts and everybody comes out and says, okay, well, these are the new string trimmers of the year and here's the new blowers. And you know sometimes we'll go to parks and they'll bring a trailer and they'll offload mowers and we'll have people come by and get people warmed up to it. And there are some instances where it does perform. And people are shocked, saying like, "Oh, I don't got to mix gas and fuel. It's not dirty. I don't have to deal with changing belts and things like that on certain mowers." And then there are others where they do come out and it's a wet day and they're cutting in a swale and it doesn't work. It's embarrassing for the manufacturer. And that's when we say, look, we're not looking to purchase these things right here and now, but we'd love to see what you have in 3 to 5 years when the technology is up to commercial standards. But right now, I simply can't buy a mower that doesn't cut grass, right? So it's bring them along the way for the journey and making sure that obviously the directors, the commissioners, and the managers are on board, reassuring them that they will get the same level of service. They will be able to provide the same level of service or a better level of service for the technology that we are procuring for their departments. And another attendee said, have you experienced unexpectedly high hydro costs when installing level 2 or level 3 chargers? We have heard of extremely high delivery costs due to them being considered under commercial plan. So it's not necessarily the high delivery costs that we faced with, but with the infrastructure upgrades. This plan was put together in 2023, and at that time, the price of copper, the price of gold, and all that kind of stuff was much cheaper than it is, as well as just contracting in general. And we're finding that, to upgrade transformers, to upgrade switch gears is astronomical than what we originally anticipated. And I mean like 2 to 3 times what is available. And when you get into things like when it's very chip heavy, like if you're looking at Siemens infrastructure and whatnot, the prices are through the roof, and it's no different from our vehicles. So we have experienced unexpectedly hydro costs when we're installing level 2 and level 3 chargers. The thing is with the level 3, you're upgrading lines, you're upgrading infrastructure. Now you're either directional drilling, or you're breaking up concrete, and that's a whole another factor that even our consultants who put this together in some cases didn't consider, because you'd have to look at each site. It's all unique, as well as, if you're on a main industrial street compared to a residential street where your recreation facilities may be located, you may not be able to actually get that power unless you're going to be incurring, major costs, or you're only going to be able to do it when you're upgrading the actual roads or the facilities. I mean, the underground and the right-of-way facilities in that area. Oh, looks like Kelly is signing off. Is there any more questions?
Doesn't look like it, Paul.
Okay.
I just wanted to say on behalf of the MEA, thanks to you for providing this presentation. It was very interesting. And thanks to the participants. If just a reminder to everyone that we will have a recording of this webinar in place. Give us about a week or so, and you could find it on our website if you go to events. Scroll down, once you click events on our website, click down to webinar library, and you'll see it loaded over there if you wanted to see this again. Thanks again, everyone. I'm turning this off now.